Hey everybody, thanks for watching. Well, another presidential election is upon us. You know, this is the 8th election that I will have voted in. Maybe you voted in more than that. My guess is with every election that comes around, you keep hearing that same old expression about how this is the most important election of our lifetime. Well, that may actually be the case this year. After all, we're in the throes of a global pandemic. We've got an economy on the brink. We've got social unrest, the likes of which we haven't seen in decades. And the dominant political parties have very different agendas. If their differences weren't so stark, maybe this election wouldn't matter so much. But stark they are. And so matter it does. Now, with that as a backdrop, recently I've noticed several professing evangelical Christians expressing their concern, even disdain, over the sitting U.S. president. Apparently, as it was in 2016, there is some reservation on the part of many in the faith community about casting a vote for Donald Trump on the varied grounds that he has a morally checkered past, that his tone is belligerent and uncivil, that he has little biblical knowledge, and that his policies and language have contributed to division and hatred. Just a few of the reasons that are out there. Now, among the voices of evangelicals opposing Trump is Daniel Lee, academic dean at Fuller Seminary. He says for him, it's all about how you treat the marginalized. If you don't vote against Trump, you're missing what the gospel is all about, what our faith is all about. So there you have a straightforward rebuke to any Christian supporting Trump. He's saying you're running counter to the gospel. And then you have the comments of former editor-in-chief of Christianity Today, Mark Galli. He called for Trump's removal last year from office, saying none of the president's positives can balance the moral and political danger we face under a leader of such grossly immoral character. And then there's progressive Shane Claiborne, founder of Red Letter Christians. He tweeted, "Every evangelical Christian should be asking, what would Jesus do? There is no way to defend the rhetoric and the policies of Trump, especially for those of us who follow Jesus." Wow, harsh words for Donald Trump from evangelicals. Are they right? Am I compromising my faith if I support Trump for president? Well, before we get into this, I just want to establish one thing. No matter who wins the office of the presidency, whether it's your guy or my guy or whatever, God is sovereign. God is on the throne no matter who's at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. And it is God who ultimately allows leaders to be installed. We read in Daniel 2:21, he changes the times and seasons. He removes kings and establishes kings. Romans 13:1 says, "Let every person be subject to the governing authorities, for there is no authority except from God, and those that exist have been instituted by God." Jesus told Pilate, "You would have no power over me if it were not given to you from above." And so I think that's important to establish at the very beginning, that it's God who calls the shots, it's God who is sovereign. Now, where does that leave us? What if, as a Christian, I'm down here and I don't like any of the options that are before me in a presidential election? Well, here is what I can do. Number one, I could choose to not vote. Now, I will admit that 4 years ago, I was conflicted about the options that I had in the presidential election as a voter. Donald Trump was somewhat of an unknown quantity at the time. I knew I couldn't support Clinton, and so I really wrestled with what I should do. But I should say this, never once did I consider not voting. Now, it's a free country. You don't have to vote. Nobody's holding a gun to your head. But you should understand something. By not voting, you are, in a sense, voting. You're voting to allow other people to dictate the future of your country. When the righteous abdicate that freedom, the unrighteous pick it up, and they will move forward with it. We're told in Hosea 8:4, it says, "They made kings, but not through me. They set up princes, but I knew it not." Now, God is not saying there that he was uninvolved or unaware of what was going on in the political process. He's simply saying that the people who participated in that process did so unrighteously. And so it's very important for righteous people to exercise their freedom of expression and their right to vote, because it makes a difference. Righteous people, of all people, should take advantage of that opportunity to be salt and light as the scripture instructs us to be. What does salt do? It preserves. It prevents spoliation. What does light do? It lights the path. It guides. It exposes wickedness. Historically, it's always been the righteous who have initiated change, who have taken every opportunity, used every avenue to make a difference. The greatest forces against slavery, the most ardent abolitionists, were devout people of faith. And so What better way do I have in the current system to initiate change as a believer than through my right to vote? And incidentally, that right was granted to me by the blood of patriots, brave men and women who fought, bled, and died to grant me the opportunity to have a voice in this society. When you give up, when you forfeit that privilege, and it is a privilege, you are trampling on the blood of those patriots. So we ought not be ungrateful for that right. We ought to show gratitude, and we ought to take advantage of it. Now, your second option, if you don't like either of the candidates before you, is that you could write in a candidate of your choosing. Don't like Trump or Biden, you don't have to vote for either of those guys. You could write in any name you want. You could write in Ronald Reagan. You could write in your pastor's name. You could write in Jesus Christ. You could write in anybody drawing breath on this planet, but just know this, whoever you write in, if not one of those two primary candidates that are running, they're not going to win. The fact is, come November 3rd, either Donald John Trump or Joseph Robinette Biden, yes, that is his middle name, will be president-elect of the United States. That's just a fact. Now, if you still want to write in a candidate on moral grounds, this is so you can sleep at night, well, who am I to disparage you from doing that? It is your right to do it, and I respect your conviction if you choose to do that. I thought about doing that in the past. The reason I did not is that I came to a conclusion that there's a better solution, and it's this. Number 3, you could vote for the platform over the candidate. Do you know the platforms of the various political parties? You know what they're all about? You should. Do some research. This is something my generation and younger generations have really dropped the ball on. We just base all of our views off of social media or off of sound bites. We read a headline. We think we got the whole scoop. We need to take the time. We need to do the due diligence as American citizens, but even more than that, as citizens of heaven who are sojourning here in this land for a short time, who are given stewardship of this land to learn what's at stake. We need to know what these platforms stand for. Is a platform really that big a deal? Here are some statistics. A recent study showed that in the past 25 years, both Democratic and Republican lawmakers in Congress voted in accordance with their platforms 82% of the time. From 1944 to 1966, it was only 66% of the time. So that number has skyrocketed for both parties, but especially for the GOP. Now, overall, Democrats in Congress voted for positions that matched their platforms 74% of the time in the past 30 years, while Republicans did so 89% of the time. And who is it who signs or vetoes what the Congress passes? It's the president. Do these platforms really matter? Well, since the members of the House and Senate vote in line with their party's platform at a very high rate, I would say that they matter a great deal. And we need to know what they say. Links to the platforms of each of the two major political parties can be found below. Take a look at those and see where you stand. But it's most important that you understand the Bible itself, because that is going to inform your understanding of the world in which you live, which means it'll inform your vote. All right, nitty-gritty time. Can I, as an evangelical Christian, support Donald Trump? The answer is yes. And here's why. Now, first, let me say, I do not revere Mr. Trump as some sort of a messianic figure. I do not follow him in some kind of a cultish fashion. My patriotism is not idolatry. I am well aware of Trump's flaws, of his impolite manner in public discourse. Yes, his tweets sound like a bad pro wrestling script. Yes, he has made poor moral choices in the past, although I think there are some assumptions about what those choices have been and whether or not they're still ongoing. But it is my honesty about Trump that allows me to vote with my eyes open. I am not voting for a personality. I am voting for a platform, one that aligns most closely with a worldview based on my faith and my Bible. And by the way, it is the Bible that shows us that God uses imperfect people to further his purpose. Even the so-called good kings of Israel, and there were not many, had deep, deep flaws. Saul was greedy. David was an adulterer. I mean, he orchestrated the death of a man in order to take his wife. Solomon was a polygamist who actually abandoned the faith for a time. There were pagan rulers in the Bible that God used. God used the likes of Nebuchadnezzar, Darius. In the book of Isaiah, he called the pagan king Cyrus of Persia my anointed shepherd. Even in U.S. history, there have been presidents with deep flaws in their own personal life. Evangelicals voted in droves for the likes of George W. Bush, who struggled with alcohol years ago. Ronald Reagan, some consider him to be the greatest president of the 20th century. He was divorced and had wayward children. Here's my point. America is not Israel. As Americans, we are not a covenant people. We are a nation of laws and freedoms. And it's a good thing to elect people who will ensure that those laws are enforced and those freedoms remain intact. Donald Trump may not be Billy Graham. He may be brash. He may be a bull in a china shop. He may pronounce it 2 Corinthians. Oy. But there's more than that. Here's what he's not. He's not someone who feels the government is entitled to citizens' money for the purpose of wealth redistribution. He's not someone who believes the judiciary is an extension of the legislature. He's not someone who believes that people are too dumb to make their own decisions and that government always knows best. He's not someone who believes our immigration laws are meaningless and that literally anyone should be able to come across our borders. He's not someone who wants to disarm Americans and is willing to circumvent the Constitution to do it. He's not someone who believes that religious freedom can be dismissed if the correct views on sexual orientation or gender aren't embraced. He's not someone who is unwilling to recognize Israel's right to exist and defend themselves while they're surrounded by hostile enemies, nor is he someone who believes that peace should not and cannot be pursued between Israel and Arab nations. But even if all that weren't the case, here's the bottom line for me, and you can call this a litmus test. I don't really care. Trump is not someone who is okay with unborn babies being aborted. And he's shown himself committed to nominating Supreme Court justices who are themselves at face value committed to strictly interpreting the Constitution of the United States, which guarantees life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness to all citizens regardless of which side of the womb you're on. Let me pose a scenario. Let's say it's the 1860s. You got a guy running for president. He's a little brash. He's a little belligerent. He's a little petulant. He's also opposed to slavery. Now, on the other side, you got another guy running for president. He's folksy. He's friendly. He's grandfatherly. He's okay with slavery. Which of those two guys do you vote for? Well, that shouldn't be hard. It wouldn't be for me. I'd vote for the brash guy. I'd vote for the petulant guy. You know why? Because some things are more important than personality. John Piper is a man that I deeply respect. I consider him a man of God. Recently, he issued a blog post detailing why he will not be supporting Donald Trump for president. In his words, there is a character connection between rulers and subjects. When the Bible describes a king by saying he sinned and made Israel to sin, it does not mean he twisted their arm. It means his influence shaped the people. Now, I would not dispute that a leader influences character. Character is important. It's always been important. I would assume that what Piper's referring to here is Donald Trump's past sexual sin as well as his current boastful demeanor in office. I think it's fair to say that Trump is boastful a great bit of the time. I don't think it's fair to say that we should assume that Trump is engaged in sexual immorality as president. In fact, he's indicated regret over past indiscretions. Now, as I've said, I support Trump over Biden despite Trump's flaws, if for no other reason that Trump supports the right to life, whereas Biden does not. To this, Piper, who is pro-life, responds by saying, "It is baffling and presumptuous to assume that pro-abortion policies kill more people than a culture-saturating pro-self pride." What? Now, again, I have respect for John Piper, but I can't fathom what he's saying here. He's equating arrogance with abortion? Now, I know that Trump can be arrogant. You know that Trump can be arrogant. The reason that we know that is because we can see it. And that is the difference, really, between Trump and other politicians. He's an open book. Right or wrong, he says what he thinks. The arrogance of other politicians is often deftly masked by campaign facade. And that means the only recourse we have to identifying character is to look at the actual policies supported and implemented by those politicians. And that leads me to the conclusion that Trump is my only option in this election. Now, understand me. All sin has a root of arrogance, but not all arrogance leads to all sin. It is wrong to be arrogant, but one can be arrogant, one can be boastful without making excuses for infanticide. It is the height of arrogance to defend the taking of lives in the womb by the thousands on a daily basis. I can't think of any greater indicator of a corrupt moral character than to defend that. Are we willing to say to future generations of Christians that we could have done something about that and didn't? Are we willing to tell them, we could have made changes to the Supreme Court, we could have saved countless lives, but we just couldn't do it because the candidate's personality was too abrasive? Are we willing to tell future generations of believers that we forfeited religious freedoms because we just couldn't hold our nose and vote for that candidate who offended our modern sensibilities? I'm not willing to do that. I can be honest about the personal shortcomings of a politician and yet be realistic about the policies that are in the best interest of a nation. And my faith and my Bible are perfectly compatible with that. Thanks for watching today. I hope you subscribe. We'll see you next time.